Welcome back to Restless, guys. So I'm Father Joseph, and I hope you can hear me. We were whispering because we were actually we were trying to, you know how like they used to put like subliminal messages in like movies where like Coke would flash up for like 1 millisecond, like a Coke thing. So we were trying to put subliminal messages, trying to get a free meal at this great restaurant that we all know. So
Yep.
Yeah. So
none of them will actually be aired.
if you hear a whisper, if you hear a whisper during this episode, it's because we want Columbus Park to give us food.
At the end of time, time when we release the bloopers, maybe you'll see it then.
That's okay. I just said it out loud.
Father just revealed our mystery.
Oh, you did.
Yes,
we want Columbus Park to give us food for free.
That's right.
But
yes.
But that's because we love Columbus Park and we're giving you free advertising right now. So give us a free meal.
If Matt decides to keep it in.
Yeah, if there's one restaurant in Stanford, definitely the Marchettis are fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really good Catholic family. Really great Catholic family.
It's the only place I eat pasta.
Well, that's
not
true.
For the others that we mentioned prior to clicking record.
No, there's only one other place.
One other place.
I don't eat at the place you mentioned.
Yeah, and if Paul makes it for us, which we're trying.
This is true. Maybe we'll try his.
Yeah, so we were kind of excited because our 200th episode just came out recently, and so we wanted to celebrate with a pasta dinner.
Right. See, it should actually be 208 though, because 52 times 4.
That'd be 4 years.
It'd be exactly 4 years.
Okay, so then we still have time to plan the party.
Yeah, we still have time. This will now date this episode. That's fine.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I'm also not supposed to hit the table. Sorry, Matt.
But also, does anyone want to do tacos instead of pasta?
I prefer not tacos.
No, we want pasta.
We could do pasta. Do a roast. That's nice. A nice roast.
You know, one time a friend of mine and I decided we were going to make dessert pasta.
It exists. That's a thing.
We took regular pasta. We threw in chocolate chips, strawberries, like caramel sauce. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever eaten.
There actually
in my
are
life.
some dessert pastas that, when properly made, are good.
I can imagine like a sweet ricotta cheese.
No, there's
like
chocolate
ravioli.
ones. There's chocolate
Is there
ones.
chocolate pasta?
Yeah.
Chocolate noodles?
Yeah, because pasta is just like flour and water.
That's what I thought, right? But somehow it did not work.
Yeah, well,
I tried.
You know,
Yeah,
if you were to follow a proper recipe, it'd probably be better. I'm not saying they're the best thing in the world.
No, but I think I may need to try it again.
Well, Paul will make you some.
I've never made it.
Well,
I just know it exists.
Well,
he's a cook.
You're a cook?
Yeah, I could try.
You're a cook. All right. So you know
our
what we should do for our
208th
208th anniversary? We should all bring a dish. What would your dish be? Your specialty?
I don't know.
This has nothing to do with our topic, by the way.
I'd probably bring meatballs.
Roasted chickpeas.
Those are good. I do like them. Meatballs?
I usually, if I have to bring something to a party that needs to serve a decent amount of people, I make meatballs.
Fair enough.
I'm sure they're delicious.
And they're
I make a really good dessert, a pina colada tiramisu. Just actually, it's to die for. But I did actually make a family drunk on it one time.
Oh wow! Did you use like Malibu or something?
Oh, I use a lot of rum. Yeah.
Right.
And their little kids are like, "Whoa, this is awesome." But
yeah.
Good times. Right. Anyway, let's get to our topic, shall we?
Yeah, very, very. Yeah, we have a hopeful topic.
As you've figured out, this is Paul and Diane.
Thank you for
not Lauren, as I almost
occasionally the names are misspoken.
My apologies, but
I'm always Paul. I am Paul.
He is the Paul.
You are never mistaken.
The one and only Paul.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But today's topic is signs of hope, and I think that's important. And food is a sign of hope, perhaps. But I think it's important because when I talk to a lot of people, particularly around election time and things like that, there's a lot of like despair in people's minds, and we always talk about the way the world is or everything that's going on in the world, and that's kind of like the catch-all phrase for total despair and like things are trash, they're terrible and awful. I mean, and I see signs of that too. I mean, not too long ago, the public high school where I was at had a bomb threat where the kids were on lockdown for 2.5 hours, and I was just reflecting like that never would have happened when I was in high school. Did that ever happen to you guys?
Yeah.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah.
We had a couple of
We've
things.
had some lockdowns back in the day.
Okay, so maybe it's not that bad, that different or that bad. But I mean, that's one question, right? Is that, does it seem like, and this is a broad question, but does it seem like society is getting worse?
No.
Do you care to qualify that answer, or would you let that hang out there in the silence?
208 episodes. Not quite there yet. Maybe this will be 208.
Who knows?
The yes or no questions still are asked. Anyway.
Because I figured you weren't 12 years old and could expand upon it.
No, I just think it's funny. What was the question? No,
is the world getting worse?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I mean, like, is the world getting worse? Well, okay. Well, let's take it from a theological perspective. So we had the fall, however many thousands or whatever years ago. And, like, since then, like, up until the time of Christ, things do actually get worse, right? You're getting farther and farther from perfection. That's a reason why some theologians will say that people's ages in the Bible are almost could be a symbolic representation of that, where you have people living 150 years, however old Noah was.
800, 900 years,
Yeah.
Methuselah.
Right, yeah, and so then then people's lives shorten because you're getting farther and farther from perfection.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. But then we have Christ. And that's like, we talked about this in a prior episode, that's like the fundamental changing point. That's the fundamental paradigm shift in the whole world for the rest of history. The whole world. And it influences everything we do today. And it's like, okay, well then, but now we're getting farther and farther from Christ.
Does that mean his grace is less potent? Holy Spirit's less strong?
No, but, I would say that.
Are we falling into a forgetfulness?
It could be. I mean, think about September 11th, 2002. The year after, the 1 year anniversary. That was a very meaningful. The pile of stuff was still down. They were still cleaning out
ground zero.
The ground zero of the World Trade Center, right?
Yeah.
And then you fast forward to September 11th, 2011. It's like it was 10 years, but they actually just opened the memorial. It's like, okay. Then you get to the 20-year anniversary. And now wherever anniversary we had this year, right? It's like it keeps getting. And so, yeah, I think there is probably something to that that's very human. Now, we've managed, because we have Christ and we have sacraments and we have the church, we are able to we've gone through periods that we've gone up and down in terms of Christendom. And we've had revivals of Christendom.
Yeah.
And then it falls away. And then we have revivals. But we have the church that has that. So is it worse than it was? Well, we have Christ, so before Christ must have been worse, right? Except for creation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The beginning of time.
I mean, you do look at human sacrifice throughout history. I mean, there was certainly transgressions of the moral law, that even transgressions of natural law that we should have known about.
Yeah. So that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And to your point, grace exists. Grace is still there, but it's a matter of taking grace, realizing there's so many distractions now, so it's very easy for people to have forgotten about religion. It's not important to them, it's not something that they explore, and also just not understanding the sacraments of divine life and the graces that are bestowed through the sacraments, true understanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's less potent, but maybe it needs to be actualized and corresponded to.
I think the emergence of it's hard to say, because you have people with no religion. It's like, okay, well, do people really have no religion? It's like, well, maybe it's a neo-paganism, right? It's a neo-paganism, and it's like, okay, well, paganism in itself, does drive you down into depravity, right? It pushes society, it pushes the person and humanity, or whoever's in that society, down into depravity, right? And so, and we kind of see that around the world. The most secular societies, not universally, but many of the secular, especially Western societies, suffer from the highest levels of depression and anxiety, suicide,
right?
Lack of marriage and children, lack of hope, despair. People are the thing that keeps them up at night and they can't sleep is climate change. It's like what? There's
I've never lost a wink over that one, but
right, but that's where that's where a lot of Western society is. It's a neo-paganism. It's well, you find something to latch onto, and maybe it's Mother Earth, so to speak. It's the God, and that's what keeps you up at night. Or people get kept up at night because of potential wars that haven't been started yet. It's well, come on.
C.S. Lewis had a quote that I just found out about recently that really struck me very much. He said that the early church missionaries were wooing a virgin lover, but current missionaries are trying to woo a jaded ex-lover, which I thought was very interesting, right? So when Christianity started to spread from the beginning, there was a sense of newness, because it was so different than the paganism that had ever been preached and known throughout the world. But now, because we have the residual memory of Christendom, it's almost like the world has gotten tired of Christianity. So it's not that they never knew it, it's that it's just they're we know it, we don't care. So it's almost more an apathy now that makes it, I think, more difficult to evangelize in many respects.
Yeah, and also maybe just one last point. I would say that this idea of, and we talk about this a lot on the show, but the idea of your truth, right? Your truth. Everyone's got their own truth, and it's they, pursue their own destiny and whatever that means, whether it's moralistic or not moralistic. Well, if you take that to its logical conclusion, like at the end of the day, like we are called, like one of the things we're called to do is to forgive and to show people mercy, and in a very, and that's like one of the most charitable things you can do.
Yeah.
Right. But if you actually don't believe that somebody else, that yourself or somebody else is actually capable of sin, there's no reason to ever show mercy, which is what we see with like a lot of paganistic cultures.
Yeah.
They don't have this concept of sin, and they treat anyone as they please.
Yeah.
Because I'm not capable of sin, you're not capable of sin, and so essentially we're on equal playing grounds.
We're really
and
in our civilized American society, it limits sin to murder, bank robbery, things that are super egregious. So the vast majority of my parishioners, probably don't think of themselves as sinners. They're like, we're good people, and you hear that at funerals, right? Oh, John Smith, he was a good person. We know he's in heaven.
Yeah.
So,
do you?
Yeah, do we? We know for certain.
Yeah.
And if there's no sin, there's no need for a savior. So there's no need for religion. People think it's just like a therapeutic. This is the way that you're like lying to yourself essentially. But I think also the thing with like relativism that we were talking about of like your truth, my truth, it has gone so extreme. The past few years particularly, that I do think. On the other side, I mean, there are people that certainly fall into that, and like that's sort of like the narrative being the liberal narrative nowadays being just like placed down people's throats left and right at schools, at workplaces, whatever. But on the other perspective, I think some people are seeing like in these extreme examples of like this makes no sense and this is not rational, and so they are searching for truth, and they are like if there's an openness of heart, to realize that this, what you're saying, there can't be my truth, your truth. Like these contradict each other. So I want to know what the truth is. And, like I think when Bishop was on our episode, he talked about like at Easter, it's been across the diocese, the most attendance that, that they've had in years. I do think there are people with an openness of heart because of the way that society has gone, who are, like pulling the opposite direction.
Yeah. No, when I teach confirmation class last year, I was very surprised that when I taught them very, very beginning, we started teaching about creation. I said, all right, guys, God created the male and female. There's only two genders. And in each of the three classes, the boys stood up and gave me a standing ovation. Mm-hmm. I was shocked. And the girls like shot knives out of their eyes, because most of them believe, you can pick whatever gender you want. But it struck me. It was like, wow. And I mean, some of the boys came up to me afterwards and said, thank you. You're the first teacher that's ever said that.
Because, I mean, there's society at large has pushed so far to one direction where there's like,
there's going to be a pendulum swing.
There's like every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, you're seeing that now. Yeah. You're seeing the pushback. I think some people can actually go too far. It's like the super masculine, like YouTube people that are like terrible. Like sometimes it can
misogynistic. And,
like that's too much. But obviously, but yeah, I mean, I think there's a significant pushback now, and we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. Yeah, exactly. So, what signs of hope do you see? Because it sounds like as perhaps the broader culture as a whole grows darker, there's always bright lights. And there's always signs of hope. There's always signs the dawn is coming.
Well, you certainly see these from a Catholic perspective. I mean, if you go to an Extraordinary Reformed Mass, it's like not a bunch of 90-year-olds who are falling apart. It's like young, vibrant families with many kids. So, you have that aspect. You also have the Catholic schools, particularly in this area in Fairfield County. I mean, we have Regina Pacis in Norwalk, which is an elementary school, I think. We've got Cardinal Kung in Stanford, classical, Catholic.
High school, yeah.
Yeah, very traditional, rigorous curriculums, but, like faithful to the truth and teaching the truth in its fullness. We've got Mater Salvatoris in Stanford, which is another fantastic Catholic school. So, and families are flocking to these schools. I mean, they're not cheap. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of hope there, and just in ministry as well, like young adult or young kid youth, Catholic ministry, young adult ministry, particularly in this area. I mean, when I graduated from college, there was nothing. I remember going to the I won't name the church. I going to a church. I was like, I'm gonna check out a young adult. I'm like this really shy 22-year-old, and going downstairs, and everyone was sitting in a circle, and I was like, this is the most awkward.
That's an AA meeting. That's not a young adult.
Yeah. And so I never went back, and there wasn't anything really for like the next 4 or so years, and all of a sudden.
But you started some.
Yes, that is true. Because at some point, if something doesn't exist and you feel called and energized by the prospect, I did spend a lot of time building up, like 2 years essentially planning events every weekend. And now the young adult scene, there's so many ministries and people are continuing to come to these events. So I think that's fantastic. Like the fact that young adults are, taking time out from, they're tired from work, but they're still coming to these things. They're coming to Mass, they're coming to confession, they're coming to adoration. I mean, there's signs of hope there because they could just go home and watch Netflix or do whatever, just to come out and commune with other people. So
well, that's one of the great hungers that we see in modern world is that hunger for community.
Yeah, and you see that particularly. I mean, obviously, I see it more in the young adult realm because that's kind of where I've spent my time. But I definitely think that there's just been an energy as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too overly patriotic here, but I would say that the American church in particular has kind of led the world in this too. I mean, the amount,
at least the Western world, yeah.
The Western world.
I would say that like Africa probably leads the world in many respects, but
let me continue. So I would say that there's always positives and negatives to all like social media and internet media in general, but I think the American church in particular, with actually very few people, but that's like Pareto distributions, that's always how it is, has really led the world in terms of like how to effectively use media to evangelize, whether it's Father Mike Schmitz or Bishop Barron or Catholic Answers people, like all these resources, and the U.S. has led that, and I think we've exported that to even very faithful Catholic areas like Western Africa, which is exploding and growing and stuff like that. So like we have it. I would say that the hope for me is really rests in, certainly in these areas of the more developing world that are just on fire, but also like the American church is like my hope is, so talk about hope. My hope is that we've kind of had the attrition. We've had the people that have left because they are, maybe there's, you ought to be disgusted by like the abuse scandals and things like that. You ought to be disgusted, and people have left because of that. It's like, okay. People have left because that's like just hard. Like there's a demand of you when you're a practicing Catholic, and people just don't respond to that, or they just don't know, which is another whole thing. So like I hope that we've had our attrition, and now we're at a point where, with all these great resources, with our like fantastic Catholic priests that we have, with these fantastic Catholic families, with these little like almost Benedict option communities around the country, like Fairfield County a little bit, that now like the bishop said on our podcast, like it's begun, right? It's begun. Like we've started, and like cheers to that.
There's two elements of that I want to point out. One is that it's very countercultural now, and counterculture can be really a draw. Think about the 60s counterculture, right, which was like flower children, hippies, and that was exciting for a lot of people, and they're like, oh, it's the new wave, it's different, so that's we're seeing that more and more. And I think about like the conversion of Shia LaBeouf, who did you ever grow up watching him as Even Stevens? One of my favorite shows of all time.
I never watched him.
Never watched Even Stevens?
I think I learned about him like Transformers movie.
I never saw that one, but Holes. You ever seen that movie?
Oh yeah,
Holes. Yeah, he was in Holes. Yeah. Bunch of great stuff. But his conversion was through when he was playing Padre Pio, and he was enamored with the mass that Padre Pio was saying, which was of course the traditional Latin mass, and that was so weird. Because it's so different, weird in a good way. Like it's countercultural, and that's a cool thing. But the other thing too, I think, is that it's been 20 years since the scandals hit, 20 plus years. It's been, really, I mean, when the gutting of the churches kind of started really in the 80s and 90s, the only people that are left are those who are serious. So it's a lot of just like,
the attrition
the attrition has already happened, the great apostasy that, and I'm seeing that more and more in the number of weddings and funerals we're getting, which is a lot less than we should. In my church has over 2,000 families, and I had 2 weddings this year.
Really?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah, because
I mean, some churches around here, it's a struggle to get a wedding date.
Now, granted, our church is not considered one of the most beautiful, but it is right around the corner from the Waterview, which is this incredible reception venue. So we get, but it strikes me that, okay, there's a lot of young people who are just not getting married. There's a lot of young people who are just getting married in front of a courthouse. So the only people that are left in the church are those who are kind of more serious about it because they know that it's going to cost them something, and there's an easier option.
But and you can't. It's hard to evangelize when the people that are there are not evangelizing. They're not living it.
Well, I recognize as a parish priest, the people I have to evangelize are the people in the pews.
Yeah.
I mean, out of my parish, 5% are disciples, maybe 10%. I mean,
right.
It's not a high number.
Hey, they're there though.
They are there,
They're
which means that they're
like the Lord
willing.
is acting on them to go to mass, and they're responding. They're participating in that.
I hope, and here's why I say here's why I say I hope, because you can also be very inoculated against it, insofar as you're like, I've heard it. I'm a good Catholic. I go to mass twice a month, and I'm good, and I don't need to do anything else because I do my bare minimum, whatever they define that as. And the challenge to actually take the gospel seriously and be open to life and to develop a prayer life and really strive for holiness. They're just like, well, I'm good. I got, I do what I need to do, and so it can actually, I think, backfire, because it's easier to convert a total pagan than it is to convert a lukewarm Christian. Yeah, I believe
it could be,
in my experience. Yeah.
Well, because the atheist or the pagan might be interested in.
Yeah, and a lukewarm Christian thinks that they have it all. Right. They think they've got faith,
or knows it too, like has a misunderstanding of the faith, or not full understanding. So that can be prohibitive.
I mean, it's the difference between is faith the sprinkling on top of your life, or is it the very core of your life, right? And a lot of Christians, it's the sprinkling on top, and they're like, oh, I have great faith, right? Because Jesus is something I think about once a day. Well, I mean, good start, but that's not the fullness. The fullness is to live for Him, to glorify Him, right? So
we have to be growing, right?
You have to be growing and wanting to grow. Otherwise, you can be very complacent, and so a lot of Christians, I think, are in that complacency state.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, stir it up in your heart.
Do it.
But I mean, Paul's point too about all the Catholic media now, it's just, I mean, people make fun of me, but my spare time is spent listening to, like reading spiritual things and listening to Catholic podcasts, because there's so many good things out there, and it's not just like to hear someone ramble about their lives. It's like they're actually, like, they're educational. I've learned so much about the faith. I've like taken things from various people that I've listened to, orders and everything, and I use it in my RCIA class. There's always, like, the beauty of our faith is that if you're someone who loves to learn, which is definitely who I am, it's like you can always go deeper, and you can always go deeper in your knowledge, but then also in your application, right? In terms of, like, how am I actually living out my faith and not just having it, like, live up here.
Yeah. You're right that I think that's one great sign of hope is the media.
Yeah.
Another sign of hope that I see, that you probably see as well, is this unbelievable rediscovery of adoration.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Which, when I was in high school, nobody did adoration.
Yep.
There wasn't.
Unheard of.
I didn't even know what adoration was in high school. I'm not going to lie.
It was a fringe thing.
I learned about it after college, because my college didn't have a very, like, vibrant Catholic community.
But you see, like, I saw Paul actually last night at adoration, but there's pretty much every day of the week here in Stanford you can go to
there's
confession.
There's Thursday now.
Oh, who's got Thursday?
St. Leo's.
St. Leo's and St. Michael's.
That's tight.
Yeah.
It's tight.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's confession.
It's rad, dude.
There's confession during those time periods.
Beautiful. So you can get a confession any day of the week.
Any day of the week.
Monday.
Yeah, maybe not Monday. No, Monday you can go St. Leo's at 8 a.m.
Okay, fine.
Okay. So
she knows. She's got the schedule.
You can ask me about the confession schedules.
Right,
yes.
Right.
No, but I mean, it's incredible seeing, people. You see it's a lot of the same faces when you go to these places at the same time. People have their routines, but yeah, I mean, it's really beautiful.
What's also cool is that a lot of ministries have, like C4C in Stanford and like women's ministries and other like Bible studies have connected their meetings to the adoration time.
Yeah.
So you could do both.
Awesome.
Which is just like, because then you're like saying, okay, well, like we're here for Jesus and to have our meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Not just like, well, let's get around and have a meeting about some logistical things that we have to plan. It's like, well, you should pray.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's got to be the heart.
It's very easy in parish life to just plan events.
Yeah.
To event plan, you know?
Right.
It's like, well, actually, it's great. There's a need. You need to do it. But like every meeting shouldn't just be event planning.
No, right, and it should be the event planning should be part of a bigger, strategic plan, right? So I challenged my parish council this past month. I said, let's think about where are we focused as a parish? Are we focused inward in serving the members, or are we focused outward in bringing, in evangelizing the world? Because I want to be focused outward, and all they could think of is, well, let's do this event. Let's do that event. And it's just like, let's do all these events. And I'm like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking for more events to do. First of all, I don't have time. But second of all, like, what I'm asking is a paradigm shift. Like, let's start thinking strategically in terms of what is all these events for? Like, we do a car wash. Great, fine. We raise money for whatever. But does that further our mission?
Yeah, I do think that, what do I have hope for? Well, what are the kind of impediments to this to some extent? Okay, I think like we have this idea of subsidiarity where everything, like, you should the lowest level, you should empower the lowest level, whatever that is, should have the most say over that level.
Yep.
So like families have like their own say. It's a domestic church.
Mm-hmm.
They can plot their own destiny to some extent. And then you have the parish, and then you have the town, and you have the diocese, whatever, and it goes out from there.
Right.
And so same too with when you think about evangelization. Like you said that I probably more than this. I think you're being pessimistic. But like 5% of your parish or something is just like that's probably higher. It's just a thought. But let's just say if it is true, or some other parish, then then the other 95%, like you said, you have to they have to go. It's like, what do you do for them? It's like pray a decade of the rosary once a week. Right.
So,
that might
just challenge
that's subsidiarity, right?
Challenge them
Empower
to take one
them.
step, yeah.
One step, because we believe in subsidiarity as a Catholic Church. It's like, well, you're going to evangelize the world. Say one decade of the rosary once a week.
Yeah.
Do it. Challenge. Like that could be a challenge.
That's a step.
And somebody may not do it.
Mm-hmm.
It takes 2 minutes, like something like that. Like not long.
Yeah, not long.
Right.
Not long.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. And I think that's an important piece. So, in today's world, do you think it's more difficult to be a saint now, or easier to be a saint now than it was in decades past, in centuries past? Or
it's
different
challenges.
challenges?
It's like, is it harder now? Is it worse? Is the world worse now than before? I think it's always hard to be a saint. We think about what we're called to do.
I guess it depends on where you, like, in terms of persecution, right? There's certainly Christians who are being persecuted currently, but like where we live, you're not going to be, well, physically, I guess, persecuted or, but I think it is harder in terms of just, like with the hate speech, and I'm not using the right term, but like you can just
politically incorrect speech.
Politically incorrect, yeah, that's probably a better term of just, it's you could be fired for stuff. You can be there's a lot of potential. I don't even know how to word this.
Downsides to living your faith in public.
Yeah. I would say that I would say there's probably a more, like, that's true, and I do think there's probably a white martyrdom. I would say a couple of things. So I think we have, as a society, made it easier to not have faith. Right? For example, like we basically, there's inefficiencies and there's people starving in the world. I don't want to diminish that, but we pretty much figured out like how to feed people in the world. Again, there's some spots where it's not true, but like by and large, we produce enough calories. We produce way more calories than we need in this world.
Yes,
by a lot.
Yeah.
We throw away like lots
a third
of calories,
of our food,
or we burn it for like put in our cars. Right? I'm serious. Like we do that.
Ethanol,
with ethanol. So we've kind of figured that out. We have like with these phones, we have unlimited distractions. You can distract yourself for years and years and years, unlimited amount of years, an entire lifetime with the content that's available today. Right? And tomorrow there's going to be, thousands and thousands of hours more content posted tomorrow. And so has it become harder? Maybe it's become easier to not to distract yourself. Because we have food, we have shelter, like in the Western world, let's say. In a lot of the developing world too, right? You have shelter. You probably have a phone.
Oh, everyone's got a phone.
Right. Even in poor countries, a lot of people have phones. Yeah. People don't have homes, but they have phones.
Yeah.
Right. And therefore they can distract themselves.
Sure.
So we've made it a bit easier. So there's a downside. So yeah, like, okay, we're not dying from hunger. and we have housing. These are like good things. We have education.
Which
You
is
know,
again
These are
kind
good
of
things, but
kind of a purifying factor, right? Because it is true that maybe 100 years ago, everyone went to church, right? Church attendance was probably 95% of the population.
something like that, yeah.
But was that mostly because of peer pressure? Because if you didn't go, they'd think badly of you. If you didn't go, you'd never get elected, mayor.
You may not have a community.
You wouldn't have a community, right? So there was a lot of other reasons why people went to church other than they love Jesus Christ and want to follow him. So now it's kind of purified that motive, that it's I'm following Christ because I want to follow Christ, because I believe it to be the truth and him to be the truth.
Yeah. I also have I grew up watching a lot of TV Land. So I watched a lot of like Leave It to Beaver, like all those shows, I Love Lucy and My Three Sons and all these shows, Dick Van Dyke Show. It struck me now, and I just realized this maybe 2 months ago. Like, this is recent. None of those shows had any faith. They were completely secular. They showed an idyllic American life, completely void of religion.
Interesting. I never thought about that, but you're right.
There's probably some exceptions to that. Like, I'm sure there's some shows where there's a church scene for a funeral or wedding or something. But like,
yeah, funerals or wedding. Yeah.
The general, you watch every episode.
You don't see a crucifix in their house.
No, there's no cross. There's no, like, June Cleaver wore pearls, not a cross.
Right.
Right. And like, there's something to that. Like we dreamed in the 50s, which by and large was like a good time for America. We dreamed of a life void of religion.
Right, but I think the 50s is what led to the 60s.
Yeah,
right?
and that's
you've
part of it.
Planted the seeds there, and really it was indeed, I think, the mass media that led to the wholesale overthrowing of religion from our hearts, and for the next several decades, from the 60s to the 90s, there was still a shell of religion because that's what polite people did, but the shell had been emptied out, I think, of the heart, perhaps.
Yeah.
Whether or not people actually believed it.
Right.
Or not.
Yeah, they were taught, essentially, through media, they were taught how to live without faith.
Yeah.
Which is living poorly.
Right.
But you can make anything look good on a TV show.
Exactly. I remember, in talking with older priests, and I've read this somewhere, that, older priests who were ordained in the 50s, 60s, 70s, if you ask them, why did you become a priest, most of their answers were, well, I looked up to Father Smith at my parish, or I really liked, what the priest did. I really, it was a place of honor. Now, if you ask priests why they became priests, who were ordained from like 2005 onwards, it was all because I had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. And it's a huge shift, right? I did not become a priest because I looked up to a priest. My priests were mediocre men at my home parish, growing up, and it was really just a personal call from Christ, which I think is a purifying factor, right? Because that should be the whole motivating factor for why we're disciples, because we personally have encountered Jesus and love him.
Well, that's hope too, because the priests who have been ordained in recent years really want to be priests, and they're solid, and they're faithful, and hopefully evangelizing the people in the pews and drawing others to the faith.
I do see that as a huge sign of hope. The priesthood is very much renewed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always caution. I should caution. I'm cautioning a priest. It's always fun. I would say, the personal encounter with Jesus Christ. I do think that as Catholics, though, like we and I know you're not saying this. I'm just clarifying it for our viewers and listeners. Is that I do think that when we say like the personal relationship with Christ, we don't mean that like if you don't have that like emotional reaction, let's say, with like that doesn't absolve you of growing closer to Christ.
Right. So it's not emotional, and it's also not private.
Right.
It's not my private relationship.
And so
with
it's
Christ,
like, can you have? I heard this at a God's planning retreat. Like,
we don't mention other podcasts on this podcast.
But one of the priests was like, I'm going to argue that like the most important thing is not a personal relationship with Christ. And he went on this long talk, but he got back to the beginning after like went in this like giant like circle around, and he came back to, yes, you have to have a personal relationship with Christ, but on Christ's terms, which is through the church.
Mm-hmm. Yes, amen.
Right. It's when you have the dark night of the soul, you still have confession, you still have prayer. Like you should still fall back on these things, even if you don't feel Christ's presence.
Yeah.
You're called to still seek Christ and to live a holy sacramental life.
Right. No, a personal relationship does not mean feelings.
Yeah.
But it means recognizing that Jesus is a real person and that we have a conversation with him
Mm.
as if he's a real person, since he is, right? We share our hearts. We speak honestly to him one-on-one, not just I'm saying my Our Fathers and Hail Marys, check the box, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And they think, I've prayed. Well, have you prayed? Has it been from your heart?
Yeah.
Because that's what prayer is.
And I think like the Eucharistic Congress they had this year in the United States in Indianapolis. I mean, I wasn't able to go, unfortunately. Were you there?
I was not there.
Okay.
No, I was in the Adirondacks when that happened.
Oh, okay. I mean, it was a great show of faith. I mean, it's like that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, even 10 years ago.
No,
it wouldn't have happened. I mean, the whole idea of, and so it's like, is there hope? It's like, yes, because you have all these people making a pilgrimage to go see Christ.
Yeah.
Right. It's a Eucharistic pilgrimage. The highlight of the event, besides like the convocation, let's say in the Lucas Oil Stadium, was the procession.
Yeah.
Of the giant, like, foot wide diameter host. It's like so cool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think Bishop Barron, like, he got like filled with emotion and like turned around to everybody and was like, "This is the church. This is us. This is our Christ, and like this is who we are."
It was a beautiful moment.
Eucharistic, like this is our Eucharistic church, and it's like yes, and like you go and you seek Christ, and that's like tremendous hope that people are doing that.
Yeah.
Whoever they are, and if it's 8 people, if it's 80,000 people, if it's 800,000 people, like that's the hope.
That's a sign of hope. Absolutely. Yeah. The refocus on the Eucharist that we see in our church. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we've run out of time, but that was a great discussion, and it gives me a lot of hope to hear these signs of hope that you see, and thank you for being part of that. Right. Thank you for being part of the media work here on Restless. Thank you for being part of the young adult group that is so on fire with love for the Eucharist. And for those who are listeners, I challenge you to not only find your own hope, but be the hope, right? To love Christ, develop that personal relationship with him, and don't be afraid to live your faith out loud. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM and 103.9 FM, and wherever you get your podcasts. So tune in next time to Restless.
Thank you.
And Columbus Park, give us free meal.
Grazie.